The reservation was for two, under a name that required the entire top floor of Aurelia to be cleared. Tariq Al-Hassan sat at the best table, the one with an uninterrupted view of the city's glittering sprawl, and listened to the woman across from him describe his life, as if it were a balance sheet of deficits. Her name was Salma, and her dark green dress was the color of money that had been in a family long enough to be bored. The arrangement had been made by their fathers, an old-world attempt at a merger through marriage. "Of course, the properties in London are impressive," she said, gesturing with a hand heavy with diamonds. "But management from a distance must be trying, especially with your limitations." Tariq said nothing. His stillness was a language his own staff understood as a gathering storm. His hands rested on the wheels of his chair, long fingers still, his posture radiating a control that seemed to defy the very piece of equipment he occupied. He was accustomed to people talking around his disability, using euphemisms like, "your situation," or "your challenges." Salma's directness was a blunter instrument, but no less insulting. Maya Evans, 21 and halfway through a double shift, approached the table with a silver water pitcher. She was socially invisible, a function of her uniform. Her job was to anticipate needs without being noticed: a refilled glass, a cleared plate, a fresh napkin. She noticed everything. She'd noticed the way Salma hadn't once made eye contact with her date, her gaze sweeping the empty restaurant as if looking for a better audience. She'd noticed the way Tariq's jaw had a subtle, tight line that hadn't been there when he arrived. "And the travel," Salma continued, her voice carrying in the acoustically perfect room. "I can't imagine. The logistics. It seems a man in your position would want a life of more simplicity. Less ambition." She leaned forward, her tone shifting to one of mock confidence. "Let's be honest. A real partnership requires two whole people." That was the line. The one that made something in Maya's professional composure snap. She had been reaching for Salma's empty bread plate, a ghost at the edge of their conversation. Her hand froze inches from the porcelain. Tariq watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. He had seen her approach, another part of the restaurant's seamless service, but now he saw her pause. He saw the shift in her shoulders. Salma, annoyed by the interruption in service, looked up at Maya. "Is there a problem?" Maya placed the water pitcher down on her service tray with a soft, deliberate click. The sound was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. She looked directly at Salma, her expression calm, her voice even. "The only problem I see," Maya said, her words clear and precise, "is that you've mistaken his wheelchair for a personality test. And you're failing it." Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Salma's mouth opened, then closed. The sheer audacity of a waitress inserting herself into this conversation was breathtaking. Tariq's expression did not change, but a muscle in his cheek tightened. He had been prepared to endure the rest of the dinner, to end it with cold, final politeness. He was not prepared for this. He was not prepared for a quiet waitress to unsheath a sword on his behalf. It was a moment that reset the world. And as the narrator might later reflect, it was the beginning of a negotiation far more complex than either of them could have imagined, its terms laid down not in a boardroom, but over a discarded bread plate. 2 days later, Maya was called into her manager's office. She was sure it was to be fired. Publicly rebuking a guest from one of the city's most powerful families was not a recipe for career longevity. Instead, her manager, a man perpetually sweating under the pressure of his job, looked at her with a kind of awe. On his desk was an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for an amount that made her stomach lurch and a simple business card. The card bore no name, only an embossed crest and a phone number. "He called this morning," her manager said, wiping his brow. "Mr. Al-Hassan. He said your discretion and character were noted. He requested you call this number. He has a proposition." The proposition was absurd. A temporary position as a personal assistant for the remainder of his month-long stay. The official reason provided by the man on the phone, a calm and formal advisor named Faisal, was that Mr. Al-Hassan required an assistant outside of his usual corporate and family circles for a series of sensitive local negotiations. Someone with local knowledge and no preconceived allegiances. The unofficial reason was hanging in the air between them. He was intrigued. Maya needed the money. Her life was a careful scaffolding of budgets and shifts, all aimed at a single, consuming goal. She accepted. What none of Tarek's staff understood was why. They saw a waitress, a girl. He saw something else. He had seen 100 people perform respect for him. He had never seen someone defend his dignity to a person who could ruin them and do it so quietly. Her first week was a test. He gave her tasks that seemed simple, but were layered with meaning. He asked her to review a list of local philanthropic opportunities. His team had prepared a glossy portfolio of established charities. Maya spent 2 days not in the office, but walking the city. She came back and slid a single sheet of paper onto his desk. On it was the name of a small, underfunded youth music program in a bad neighborhood. "The others are fine," she said, not looking at him as she organized a stack of mail. "They have galas and corporate sponsors. This place, they buy used guitar strings, and the director retunes the pianos herself. A donation to them changes the place. For the others, it's just another line item in their annual report." He studied her. How would she know that? He later had Faisal investigate. Maya had volunteered there 2 years ago, before her shifts made it impossible. She noticed things from the ground up. What she did not realize was that he had already made the donation, doubling the amount she might have imagined, before she even finished her sentence. A few days later, Faisal approached her with a keycard. "Mr. Al-Hassan has arranged for a corporate apartment for you during your employment. It is closer to the offices." The apartment, she knew, would be a palace of glass and steel. It would also be a cage, a reminder of her status as a temporary fixture in his gilded world. She pushed the keycard back across the desk. "Thank you, but I prefer my own place. I have a cat. He's very particular about his windows." Faisal raised an eyebrow. No one said no to Tarek Al-Hassan. The refusal was reported back to him within minutes. Tarek was in the middle of a video conference with his board in Riyadh. When Faisal delivered the news, Tarek didn't react, but for the next 10 minutes of the meeting, a small, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. She wasn't grasping for the perks. She was simply doing a job. The real surprise came during a tense negotiation with a tech firm. Tarek's team of lawyers and executives were advising him to accept a compromise. The firm's CEO was playing hardball, threatening to walk. The room was thick with tension. Tarek, silent at the head of the table, was watching everyone. He caught Maya's eye where she sat against the wall, taking notes. He tilted his head slightly, a silent question. She held his gaze and gave a tiny, almost invisible shake of her head. Later, when his team had left, he wheeled his chair over to her small desk in the corner of his suite. "You disagreed with my entire advisory board." "Why?" Maya stopped typing. "Their lead negotiator, Mr. Davies." He kept touching his tie. People do that when they're repeating a lie they've practiced. But the real tell was his phone. It was face down on the table. In a $12 billion deal, no CEO ignores his phone for 2 hours unless he's terrified of getting a call from his own board telling him to take whatever he can get. She looked at him directly. "They're not walking. They're praying." He held her gaze. The air conditioning hummed, a low, cold sound. The kind of cold that means no one ever argues about the thermostat. He had built an empire on reading people, on seeing the tells others missed. And she had just seen it all from the sidelines. That evening, he asked her to stay late to prepare documents for the following day. The work was finished by 10, but he didn't dismiss her. Instead, he wheeled himself to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. "Why this job, Maya?" he asked the glass. "You're overqualified to be a waitress. You're overqualified for this, if I'm being honest." She hesitated. It was the first time he had used her first name in a way that felt personal, not professional. "I'm saving money," she said simply. "For what?" "To buy something back," and then the story came out. Not as a flood of emotion, but as a series of facts. Her father, a luthier. The small music shop he'd owned downtown, a place that smelled of wood shavings and rosin. His business partner, a man who was like a second father to her, who had mortgaged the business behind his back, bled it dry, and disappeared. Her father's heart attack 6 months after losing the shop. The building was owned by a holding company now, but she tracked its status obsessively.
She was going to buy it back.
It was, she explained, the only thing left of him. A wound that concrete, that specific, was something Tarek understood. It was during that conversation that Faisal entered the room. He needed a signature, but his timing was an interruption. He saw the way they were positioned, not as employer and employee, but as two people in a quiet space. He saw the look on his employer's face. The next day, Faisal requested a private word with Maya. He was polite, paternal, and his words were forged from steel. Mr. Al-Hassan is a man of great focus, he began. But he can, at times, become interested in novelties. Your perspective is refreshing for him. But you must understand the world he occupies. There are lines. Cultural, social, financial. They are not suggestions. They're walls. Do not mistake his professional appreciation for a personal opening. It will only lead to disappointment for you and a complication for him. The warning was clear. She was a diversion, a temporary curiosity. That night, she worked with a renewed sense of professional distance. She was efficient, quiet, keeping to her side of the vast office suite. Around midnight, she stood up to stretch, her back aching from the long hours. As she turned, she saw him. He was in the darkened doorway connecting to his private quarters, watching her. He wasn't looking at the documents on her desk. He was looking at her. She froze, a file folder in her hand. He did not look away. He didn't smile or speak. He simply watched her, and in his gaze, she saw a profound loneliness she recognized because she felt it in her own bones. The distant sound of a ship's horn from the harbor drifted through the silent room, a low, mournful call. The real storm broke a week later. Tarek was the keynote speaker at a global investment summit held at a hypermodern, aggressively minimalist retreat carved into the desert 100 miles from the city. The place was a monument to wealth and isolation. Maya was there to manage his schedule. As Tarek finished his speech, the sky, which had been a placid blue, turned a bruised, violent purple. A sandstorm, the kind the old-timers talked about, descended without warning, followed by a torrential downpour that was biblical in its intensity. Within an hour, the single road back to civilization was a river of mud. The power grid for the entire retreat failed, and the backup generators sputtered and died. They were stranded in Tarek's private villa, a sleek box of glass and concrete, now lit only by the emergency lights in the hallways and the frantic flashes of lightning outside. The villa's advanced systems were all dead. That included the elevator to the second floor. Tarek was confined to the ground level. For a man who commanded private jets and reshaped city skylines, being trapped by a simple flight of stairs was a unique kind of prison. Maya found him by the cold, dark fireplace, his profile rigid as he stared out at the storm. She saw a flicker of something she'd never seen in him: raw frustration. He slammed the palm of his hand against the leather armrest of his chair, a sharp, contained sound of impact. "The one thing money can't buy," he said, his voice low and tight. "Gravity." He looked up at her. "I need your help." The words sounded foreign in his mouth. He never needed help.
He commanded it.
"The logs for the fireplace are in that alcove. I can't reach them. And this furniture, it's all in the way." Together, in the growing dark, they worked. She moved a heavy marble coffee table. He navigated his chair around it, directing her where to move the sofas. It was a simple, physical task, a collaboration without words. When they were finished, a fire was crackling in the hearth, casting flickering, warm shadows across the room. It was the first real warmth they'd had in hours. They sat in the firelight, the storm raging outside. The professional layers had been stripped away by the blackout. They were just two people in a powerless house. "It must be exhausting," Maya said into the quiet. He turned to her. "What is?"
"The performance," she said.
"The control. You build walls so high no one can see in. You can't be surprised when all they see is the fortress." It was honest. It was the kind of thing no one in his life was permitted to say. She expected anger, a retreat into cold formality. Instead, he was silent for a long time. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "This chair," he said finally, looking at his own hands. "It's not what people think. The injury, that was only the beginning." And he told her. He told her about the accident, a stupid, youthful race on a desert highway. But the other driver wasn't a stranger. It was his older brother, Hamad. They had fought, a bitter argument over the future of their family's conglomerate. Hamad had been reckless. After the crash, which left Tariq paralyzed, Hamad walked away without a scratch. And in the aftermath, in the brutal family power struggle that followed, Hamad had been the one to argue most forcefully that Tariq's disability made him unfit to lead. He had used the chair as a weapon against him. The ultimate betrayal wasn't the loss of his legs, it was the loss of his brother. His wound was betrayal, a deep, foundational crack in his trust in the world. Maya listened, her heart aching with a familiar pain. When he finished, she didn't offer platitudes or pity. She offered the only currency that mattered between them, her own truth. She told him about her father's partner, the man they called Uncle Ben. How he had come over for dinner every Sunday, how he had taught her to ride a bike, and how, all the while, he was setting up shell corporations, siphoning funds, and systematically destroying her father's life's work. "Betrayal doesn't just break your heart," she said, her voice soft. "It rewrites your past. It makes you question everything you thought was real." Loss responded to loss. His wound found its echo in hers. The space between them crackled with something more than firelight. He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time without the lens of employer and employee. He reached across the small space, separating his chair from her armchair, his fingers gently brushing the back of her hand. It was a tentative, questioning touch. The air grew thick, silent save for the drumming rain. He opened his mouth to speak, his name a whisper on his lips. And the lights flickered on. The emergency generators had finally kicked in, flooding the room with harsh, artificial light. The spell was broken. He pulled his hand back, as if burned. The moment was gone. The next morning, the summit resumed. The storm had passed. The world of business and power rushed back in. Maya felt the distance between them return, a chasm of wealth and expectation. She saw Salma, the woman from the restaurant, walking with her father, a formidable tycoon Tariq was hoping to court as an investor. Salma shot Maya a look of pure venom. During the day's final presentation, a critical point in the negotiations with Salma's father, Tariq's lead analyst faltered on a question. The room went quiet. All eyes were on Tariq to see how he would recover. His team looked at him, waiting for him to step in. Instead, Tariq looked past them all, his gaze finding Maya where she stood by the door. His voice was calm and clear, carrying across the silent auditorium. "Miss Evans," he said, "your analysis on this matter yesterday was insightful. Please share it with us." A collective gasp went through his team. Salma's face was a mask of thunderous disbelief. He was not just asking for her opinion. He was putting her on the stage. In front of his rivals, his allies, and the woman who had scorned them both, he was making a public gesture. It was not a declaration of love. It was a declaration of trust. And in his world, that meant far more. Salma and her father, Baron Al-Jamil, did not take the public endorsement of a waitress well. It was a slight, an embarrassment. And they were not people who let slights pass. The Baron was a man who moved mountains, not with dynamite, but with quiet phone calls and leveraged debt. He saw Maya not as a person, but as an unacceptable variable in his plans for a strategic alliance with Tariq's empire. So, he aimed his weapon at her heart. He found the man who had ruined her father. The man was living a modest life in another state, the money long gone. The Baron's offer was simple. He would provide the capital for the man to purchase the building that housed her father's old music shop. He would own it, a ghost from her past come back to haunt her, ensuring she could never reclaim her dream. Then, the Baron sent for Maya. The meeting took place in a sterile, impersonal hotel suite. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out his offer on the polished table between them. If she were to resign from Tariq's employ immediately, sever all contact, and leave the city, he would not only stop his plan, but he would arrange for the deed of the music shop to be transferred to her name. Free and clear. He is a sentimental man, the Baron said, steepling his fingers. This infatuation will pass. But the opportunity one am offering you will not. You can have your past back, Miss Evans. All it will cost is your future with him. It was a perfect, cruel threat. It mirrored the wound he carried, the use of a personal vulnerability as a strategic weapon. The Baron was offering her the one thing she had worked for, prayed for. He was also asking her to become someone her father would not recognize, a person whose integrity was for sale. Maya sat there, the air in the room feeling thin and cold. She thought of Tarek, of the quiet strength in his eyes, of the moment by the fire when their shared wounds had connected. She thought of her father, not of his shop, but of the calluses on his hands from a lifetime of honest work. She did not call Tarek. She did not run to him for rescue. This was her fight. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She looked Baron Al-Jamil in the eye. "My father's legacy isn't 4 walls and a roof," she said, her voice steady. "It's the lessons he taught me about value. Some things aren't for sale. You can have the building. It's just bricks. You can't have anything else." She walked out of the room, leaving the Baron staring after her, a man utterly baffled by an asset that refused to be liquidated. She walked away feeling the sharp, clean pain of her choice. She had chosen herself, even if it meant losing everything else. Faisal, Tarek's ever-watchful advisor, learned of the Baron's machinations through his own network. He discovered the meeting and the nature of the offer. He went to Tarek immediately, expecting his employer to be furious that Maya had met with a rival alone. But when Tarek heard what she had done, how she had refused the offer without hesitation, a profound stillness settled over him. He wasn't angry. He was seeing, with absolute clarity, the truth of her character. She had not been rescued. She had met the threat on her own terms and defeated it not with power, but with principle. He now knew what he had to do. The summit's closing gala was a glittering affair. The Baron Al-Jamil was being honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award. As a key partner, Tarek was invited to the stage to say a few words. He wheeled himself to the podium, the room falling into a hushed silence. Everyone expected a polite speech about synergy and future growth. Tarek looked out over the crowd, his gaze passing over the Baron's table until it found Maya, standing near the back of the ballroom, ready to slip away. "Tonight we celebrate achievement," Tarek began, his voice resonant and clear. "But true achievement is not only about what we build. It is about what we value. It is about what we protect." He paused. "To that end, my company is launching a new foundation, a fund dedicated to restoring small, family-owned businesses that have been destroyed by predatory practices and corporate greed." A murmur went through the room. The Baron Al-Jamil's face tightened. "The foundation's first act," Tarek continued, his eyes locked on Maya's, "will be to purchase and restore a landmark in this city, a place of craft and history, a small music shop, once known as Evans and Son Luthiers." The name dropped into the room like a stone. He had not only defended her, he had publicly championed her cause, turning the Baron's secret weapon into a public monument to her integrity. It was a checkmate, played out on a stage of hundreds. He had chosen her, not in a whisper, but in a way the entire world could see. Later that evening, as the gala was winding down, Faisal approached Maya. The usual professional distance was gone from his eyes. He looked at her with a newfound respect. "For 10 years, I have watched the most powerful people in the world try to give him things," the old advisor said, his voice quiet. "Alliances, companies, fortunes. You are the first person I have ever seen give him back his own strength." A month later, the restaurant Aurelia was closed for a private event. The top floor was empty, save for one table, the same one where it had all begun. Tarek sat on one side. But this time, Maya was not in a uniform. She wore a simple blue dress, and she was seated across from him. The table between them was not set for dinner. It was bare, except for a single, ornate iron key. He pushed it slowly across the polished wood surface. It was the key to the shop. Her shop. "There is a condition," he said, his voice soft. She looked at him, her heart beating a steady rhythm in her chest. "What is it?" "That you save me a seat for the grand opening." His eyes held a warmth she had only seen glimpses of before, a light that had nothing to do with wealth or power. She smiled, a real, brilliant smile that reached her eyes. She slid the key back toward him. "Only if you agree to be my partner."
He stilled.
"In the business." "In everything," she said. And so it was that the most significant deal of Tariq Al-Hassan's life was closed. It turns out the highest-stakes negotiation of his career wasn't for an oil field or a skyscraper, but for a table for two, and it was the only deal where he was happy to concede everything.